Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, The Inked Reader. My name is Eva and today I'm wrapping up the books I've read in the month of November 2022. You might have seen the statistics. I didn't think I had read that much, but apparently I have, which is good. Unfortunately, definitely not my best reading month. A lot of things were meh. But without further ado, I'm gonna go from the least enjoyable read to the most enjoyable read. And please bear in mind that with enjoyable, I mean enjoyable. I don't mean quality. So if this list was to be made about, quality of writing or overall quality of the books, it might have looked different. I just chose to go with the books that I enjoyed the experience of reading them the most. But I guess I do wanna make a kind of statement, just say, I do recognize that enjoying something doesn't necessarily always reflect into its quality. Before I actually start with the list, there are 3 books that I DNF'd, and I want to just say one thing about them. I think toward the end of the year I have less patience for books, and so if maybe I was to read them in January or February, I would have pushed myself a bit more, although this year I've been better with DNFing. And I think this point of me doing the shelf TBR is DNFing books if I don't like them, getting rid of books. I need to sort out space. I need to keep the books I really want to keep. However, all the books I'm about to show you, there is audience for it. They don't have anything inherently wrong, and I honestly think that people might enjoy it. I think the writing was okay. They're overall good books. They just bored me. Basically, they were just not my cup of tea. They just didn't give me what I was looking for in my reading during this month. So I'm gonna donate them, and they're gonna go to families where they can be loved. But I want to say that I don't think these are bad books. It's just they weren't for me. So the most recent DNF is The Witch's Kiss. Now this is a YA, and initially it was okay for the first few chapters, and then I realized I just didn't really care. I was halfway through and then just like, I don't care about this. But in terms of YA for younger audience, I think this was overall okay. Nothing special, okay. The next 2 books I'm gonna get people mad. So let's start with the one. So I'm just gonna go through them. So I DNF'd Anno Dracula. I know. I should have loved this. I love vampire literature, but this just didn't work for me. This is an alternative history fantasy where basically Queen Victoria marries Lord Dracula, and this takes place during, the Jack the Ripper murders. However, you are told immediately who's the killer, and I've just read so much about Jack the Ripper last year that I know the cases in and out, and I just couldn't care. First of all, we already knew who the killer was. I'm gonna touch up in another book we're going to discuss later on why I don't like this kind of thrillers where and I was just bored. I don't think this is a bad book overall. I think I've just read too much about Jack the Ripper. I don't care about retelling of Jack the Ripper. I think like the true story is gross enough. It's enough for me. I don't need the rest. And the one probably that's going to upset more people is I DNF'd The Bone Shard Daughter, and I honestly generally think that this is a good fantasy. It just didn't have nothing in it that made me think like, oh, this is such a new groundbreaking fantasy. It's got something special about it. Like, it was just like a million of other fantasy I'd read. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna say out there, I know there are different creatures, the world is different, the characters were different, but it just felt like something I'd already read. It was well written, as, definitely a big audience for this. It wasn't just me. So yeah. Now that I've made you mad, let's start. I'm gonna start at number 10, which is a book that, unless I had written down what I thought about it as soon as I finished it, I would not remember. I don't even remember the plot, which is very weird for me because usually I've got very good memory. But at number 10, I've got Belladonna, and this is a fairly new release. It's the stunning FairyLoot edition. I've done a whole unboxing of these. It does look amazing. Like, as always, FairyLoot with her releases. I'm not sure if this is the YA or adult book for the month of September or October. It does look lovely, so I'm actually debating of keeping these just because I want to display it. But the book in itself was absolutely unremarkable. And I don't really give synopsis in my wrap-ups if I've talked about them in my wrap-ups, in my TBRs. However, I'm not so sure I've talked about these apart from the unboxing. So this is, in a nutshell, is the story of this girl. All her life she's been living with relatives because all the people in her life end up dying, and she can see death, and she realizes that actually she's the only one who can be poisoned. A lot of bad things can happen to her, and she never ends up dying, while her parents and her relatives are not so lucky. So all her life she's been basically moving from place to place, trying to fit in, and at the same time she's able to see death and communicate with him. And then finally she ends up in this other relative's house, and now she's exhausted, she doesn't want to move anymore, but the matron of the house just died, passed away, and she suspects that there is foul play. And so she decides to team up with death and find out what happens to this matron and save the family from imminent death. That's in a nutshell. It does sound cool, and I think the idea behind this was cool. I did call all the twists though, and I just found that this is the kind of YA that I don't enjoy anymore. It's just shallow characters. Overall, the plot might have a good idea, but the execution is just okay. Like, it's not entertaining. It's a book, it's a kind of YA books that do not entertain me. And I don't know if it's the pace, I don't know if it's just, again, the shallow characters and the plot, the overall, the way it develops just doesn't appeal to me, or it's maybe too slow. Just something wasn't right for me, and I keep having these experiences, unfortunately, with a lot of YA. There is just something missing. There is just no element for me to just say, okay, that intrigued me, or that character I really liked, or, you know, along those lines. And so I didn't necessarily hate it. I gave it 3.5 stars, but I honestly can't remember the end, I don't remember anything else. I won't continue on, this is a series, and yeah, unfortunately this wasn't very much a success. Now, at number 9 we have a book. It's a thriller book. This is Cross Boneyards, and it's a murder mystery where basically you follow this psychologist trying to help the police solving a string of murders of these women. And now this book is bad. Like, quality wise, this probably would be last place. Like, this is a bad book overall. It's a bad thriller, it's badly written, and the characters are abysmal. However, at the time when I finished this, I thought maybe I can read the next one. And I'm gonna go into why in a second. So in terms of things I absolutely detested, I think you just follow this unhinged sort of cousin of Jodie Foster in, you know, Silence of the Lamb, but like, it's an attempt to recreate something of a sort of a psychologist that, you know, she can communicate with killers and she can find clues and help police putting things together. Now, this is in theory. In practice, you've got this unhinged psychologist who needs to be on the other side of a chair. She needs help, she needs psychological help, and she has no reason whatsoever to speak with these serial killers as she does, to be involved as she does, and then the police apparently just keep asking her to go and speak with them. And again, this is the shortest conversations with a killer you can ever have. Like, the author doesn't even actually take the time to let us see her interviewing the killer. Like, they just exchange like a couple of sentences, and that's the mythological interview with the killer, and it's just like, this is such bullshit. Also in England, things don't work this way. Like, psychologists are not taken and you can speak with a serial killer. Somehow that bothered me because I work in the system here, and it just doesn't work this way at all. And also, I think it didn't feel realistic at all, in the sense that this protagonist keeps going jogging for hours on end in the middle of the night in very not safe parts of London. She finds bodies randomly, and then, you know, all the time someone knocks at her door, something horrible happens when she opens it. At the point I was just like, if someone knocks, just pretend you're not home. Like, for how many times can someone knock, you go open the door and something awful, like, you don't learn? Like, nothing of this protagonist was well done. It must be said though, the pace is very fast. Like, you are so probably grossed out for what you're reading. You're just so like, what am I reading right now? Like, is this for real? Like, that there is a compelling side of it. Like, there is a side that just says, this character, our main protagonist, she's just so fucked up that you just want to know what happens to her. Now, of course, the answer to that is a lot of shit, but I don't know. Now, when I wrote down my notes, I was just like, I might even potentially read the sequel, or maybe I'll come back to my senses. And I think I have. I think I'm just gonna get rid of these. I don't need to continue on. Worst case scenario, if, you know, I keep being masochist and just wanting to read very bad thrillers, I can always pick up like audiobook or looking up in the library. I would never suggest these. I have to say though that there is a couple of twists that I didn't necessarily saw coming, and the end is definitely probably the best part in a sense, so it was entertaining, and that's why this is a number 9, because I still remember it very well, while this one just went over my head. But not a good thriller, and I give it probably 2.5 stars, something of the sort. At number 8, I've got a short story. It's a horror short stories. I listened to this on audio, on Scribd, and that is Crossroads. Okay, and so this is, I didn't give you a synopsis of this, but of course, because I picked up randomly on Scribd. So this is a short story about this mother who loses her son due to like a car accident, and then she finds out by mistake that if she cuts herself with blood, the son, the ghost of the son, basically appears. The problem is that the ghost will always demand more from her. Now you can guess where this is going. Now this is definitely not something that if you are, for example, having issue with self-harm, or you think that self-harm is particularly triggering for you, for your mental health, stay clear of that. Like, stay clear of that, because this is full of it, and it's just basically all self-harm, if you want, to the extreme then levels. And I didn't think this was as good as other people said it was. I found that the grief in this was very touching, in a sense, like the grief of this mother losing her son. Like, I could definitely, like, I felt genuine emotions for her. However, there was also an element of frustration with this woman, and this woman that, for, you know, you're grieving, and I get it, but you're also a clever woman, and you can tell that she's a clever woman, and I can see why grief would kind of, you know, make you take the decision that you have. However, there is also an element of her being clearly a smart woman and never questioning what was happening, never having that balance of, I'm grieving so I'm still doing it, but at the same time I am rational certain times, and I can understand that, you know, things can't be this way for real. And the fact that she never used the rationality at any point, or the author didn't even, I don't know, I found her frustrating at some time. Like, I found frustrating the fact that she could have asked for help, she could have done anything else, she could have at least questioned what was happening, and she didn't. So therefore I gave it 3 stars. It was definitely disturbing, but again, it was short, so I don't know. I like the end. I didn't mind it, but I would just say I'm pretty meh overall about these. Then another audiobook that I picked up in the spur of the moment was Imperfect Justice. This is prosecuting the Casey Anthony case. And this is written by basically the prosecutor of Casey Anthony, and I didn't know anything about this case, but apparently this is a mother that she stood accused of killing her toddler, 3 years old daughter, and you basically follow the attorney of the prosecution, you know, just putting together the case from basically before, when the girl was reported missing, the little girl was reported missing, to then arresting the mother, charging her, eventually finding the body, and then the outcome. Now, I don't feel like this is a spoiler because it's a public case that you might have heard. I didn't personally. I had heard the name before, so that's why I was curious to pick this up and find out what happened. But basically, she is eventually found not guilty of killing her daughter and let go. And it was fascinating hearing the story directly from the attorney that, you know, prosecuted her, part of the prosecution team. I found this audiobook to be, you know, full of information of a case that I didn't know nothing about, but ultimately it was extremely frustrating going on this journey, because, I mean, I didn't think I could find any jury as bad as the O.J. Simpson one, and apparently, clearly was wrong. Another jury that was very shitty, and I was just having these thoughts in my mind, and, you know, reading these books about these clearly notorious cases that clearly they are guilty, like there is no way they are not guilty, and just jurors letting them get away with it. And the frustration becomes, you know, maybe something is wrong with the, you know, judicial system that you have. something there is not working. So I was a bit upset. But I was thinking, and I wrote this on my Goodreads reviews, just like, imagine any kind of people that you meet and you just say, how are you even alive? How did you even got to be an adult? You're clearly a moron. All of those people, and then imagining that potentially those people could be called to dictate the future or the guilt or not guilt of the murder of your son or your daughter, or of your future, or whatever it is. Would you trust these people? People that are uneducated sometimes. Like, anybody could be called for jury service. Like, you don't have to have an education, you don't even have to have been tested for IQ or whatever. And I'm not saying that people that have, I don't know, a lower IQ or they are not educated can't know the difference between right or wrong. Of course they can, but at the same time there should be a standard measure. There should be a test where you are tested before you're put to be a juror, because that's a big decision. That's a life-changing decision you'll make. And if you're not able to understand, for example, what scientists are telling you, what doctors are telling you, you can't understand the relevance of, I don't know, a proof or fingerprint, DNA. If you don't understand what's going on, and if you don't have the capacity of putting the case together or actually listening in and understanding the material that's been presented to you, how can you judge guilt or not guilt? Like, that is, for me, is mind-blowing that anybody can just be put on, be a juror and then decide. And in this case, it was just so frustrating seeing this woman who apparently, according to a psychiatrist, I don't know, she doesn't have a personality disorder, like a woman who can't tell the truth ever. Like, this woman has never told the truth ever. Like, she's caught lying over and over again. Her daughter is missing and she goes around shopping, partying to the boyfriend's house, she's laughing, and her daughter is apparently missing. We know the daughter is dead and she killed her and left in a swamp. She doesn't have a personality disorder. She's okay. And it's just like, what? Sorry, what? Who tested her? I really hope that it's a case like O.J. Simpson case, in which she might be not found guilty in court, but outside she has been ostracized, and absolutely she got what she deserved in the end. I think I read somewhere she's the most hated woman in America, and she deserves it if she is. So yeah, hopefully she didn't get away with the public, with the general public. Overall, this was a too lengthy audiobook in a sense for the material that was in it. And also I'm starting to notice this pattern where prosecutors or even police officers that eventually end up writing books about the cases that they deal with, there's a lot of frustration between each other. They get to each other's throat a lot, prosecutors against police and blah blah blah. There's a lot of police not doing their job right, and I guess there is an issue there, because I've read so many true crime, and a lot of the time people mess up, and you can't mess up when it's life and death. You can't not do your job properly. It means that something, your training, the way you are supervised or whether is not working well. And I think I've also noticed that a lot of these people that end up writing these books, they use the book also as kind of venting against other prosecutors, other police officer, whatever it is, and it can get a bit like, well, I understand, but at the same time, I feel like, you should tell them directly, not tell me in a book. I don't know. I've just noticed these patterns. But anyway, I gave this 3.5 in general. I think if you don't know anything about the case, this will give you a very good overview. Ultimately, it leaves you with a very bitter taste in your mouth. On number 6, I have read my actual book club book. I'm going to discuss these very soon with my book club members. This is The Herd, and this is a fairly recent release, and basically this is the story of these two friends. They have kids, they have been best friends since university or something of the sort. One of them, her child, she has seizures and therefore she can't have vaccines, although her mom is very much pro-vaccine. At the beginning, she can't vaccinate her child because of the seizures, and she's just very paranoid, basically, of people are hanging around her child if they're not vaccinated. On the other hand, you got her best friend who has family issues due to vaccines, so she decides to not vaccinate her child, and she doesn't though tell her best friend. And then something horrible happens, and you basically follow, again, a family court case, actually, of them having to face each other in court. And so yeah, you got basically these two sides, pro-vaccine people that are against vaccines and, you know, siding with one mom or the other, and you just follow along basically the story. Now, this is definitely not my cup of tea, in the sense that this is not a genre that I would have reached out for on my own. I've always been kind of like, I don't know, I thought somehow that the myths around vaccines had gone. They were a thing of the past. And then I remember COVID, and then boom, it's like, no, actually it's very real. And it's something I never spent much time thinking about, to be honest. So this book definitely made me think about that. I did guess one big thing toward the end, but I have to say that it's a nice twist. I loathed Elizabeth in this. I was honestly ready to strangle her with my own hands. However, it did feel pretty real. It did feel realistic. And I read this so quickly because I just wanted to know what was happening. So it was a very easy read. It's a plus, definitely well written overall. Some parts of the plot I didn't understand why they were there. So it's definitely probably around, I don't know, 3.75 stars book for me. But I'm curious to know what my other book club members will think. And again, I think it sparked and put in my head a discussion that I didn't have before. So scary though, video of this happening. Terrifying. At number 5, I have Birdman by Mo Haida. This is a start of a detective series by Mo Haida, and of course after having read The Devil of Nanking, I wanted to read more by her. And okay, so this didn't start out well in the beginning, and I think this does something that I really don't like in my thrillers in general, which is telling me immediately who the killer is, and then basically I have to follow police finding out what I already know. That is a formula that doesn't work for me in my thrillers. Like, I hate that kind of thrillers. It did pick up toward the end because there were some twists that luckily we weren't told. We weren't told to a certain point, but she still falls in that formula then. So I guess a big question here is she gonna adapt this formula throughout the series? Because if that's the case, then I might not continue on. For how much I enjoy writing, and for how much ultimately these are, on a certain aspects, like how graphic and harrowing and absolutely brutal to read her books are, and this is no exception. And I do like, you know, the thrillers to make you uncomfortable because you're reading about, you know, people getting killed, you're reading about disturbed minds, and it's fair enough that they are disturbing the books itself. So I do like that kind of brutal thriller, if you want, explicit thriller. So that I liked. And I did also appreciate the main character. I think is very fascinating. There is like a bigger family mystery that we don't know. Hopefully we will find out, and that's something that honestly makes me want to go ahead, because I do want to find out what happened to, you know, one of his family members. And so there were definitely intriguing elements, definitely things I loved, but I loathe when they tell you who a killer is. And I don't know if this is also one of her like earlier novel, so I believe so, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments if you know. So, you know, definitely she might have improved, she might have adopted a new technique hopefully when writing her thriller. So I will pick up the next and then see. At number 4 I've got, this is the YA November book. Is in November, I think, yeah, November YA book from FairyLoot. This is One Dark Window, a new release. I've done an unboxing of these, but I really like how this looks like. And I'm not so sure I'll give you the synopsis, so I'm gonna repeat very quickly, but basically this is about this girl that she lives in this world where there are like magic cards in which if you tap them 3 times you can acquire certain powers according to the card you're tapping, and then you tap it again 3 times and then it goes away. But in this world where people can wield magic and use it, if you have this deck of cards, there is also like an infection, and if you get this infection, your veins become very dark, you might get like a fever, and ultimately you will have magic powers without cards. And what happens is, because the king doesn't want this to happen, is that these kids that get the infection, they are routinely found out and killed. But our main protagonist, she's hidden by her father, so she's not found out when she has her infection, and as a result of that infection, though, she basically acquires a monster in her head. And I don't see this as necessarily as a retelling of a Beauty and the Beast, but it can be like a gender inverse Beauty and the Beast in a sense. So she has the beast inside her, and she's basically at the beginning of this book set up. She's traveling home and she set up of these two individuals that they are looking for these cards, and somehow she starts working with them, trying to put together the deck of cards, of these magic cards, because of a legend behind, which I don't want to spoil. So it's a very intriguing yet a bit complex to explain idea. I think it was definitely a new thing. The kind of concept of the story was kind of unique, and I really enjoyed. I did enjoy, like, you know, there is a couple in here, is a YA book, and there is, of course, romance. It did lose me a bit in the middle. It drags just a tiny bit in the middle, but the end was very good, and I think I will continue on. I think it's such a novelty, such a concept that I've not seen in YA often, and the writing is good overall, and we do have distinctive characters enough for me to say, you know what, I might check out the sequel, and I give it 3.75, 4 stars. At number 3, I've got probably the biggest surprise of the month, in the sense that I really didn't think I was gonna like these. And if you have been following me a bit, you might know why. At number 3, I've got Poster Girl. This is the new release by Veronica Roth, and again, this is the adult FairyLoot for November. I think I've not necessarily unboxed it, but I showed you very quickly what it looks like. I really like the this dust jacket here, and I didn't give you a synopsis, so I'm gonna do it now. I'll attempt it because it's a bit complex. So basically, this is a dystopian standalone fantasy novel, and you follow the leftovers of this dystopian society, this kind of dictatorship, if you want. You follow the survivors of people that were pro this regime, and they have now been ostracized for society. They've been reclused in like one single block of flats, or a few block of flats of, you know, Seattle, or what would be Seattle, and they have to live there. And in particular, you follow the daughter of one of the chiefs, one of the most prominent figures of this ex-regime, and she's been imprisoned there with a bunch of other people for most of her life, and now she's given an opportunity to solve a crime. We find out what happened to a girl that had been taken away from her parents, because back in the regime people couldn't have 2 children. So she needs to find out what happened to the second child of a family that had been taken away and given up for adoption, and if she does that, she will be released and allowed to, you know, roam free in the world, or something of the sort. Now, I didn't even read Divergent. Like, dystopian never appealed to me. Like, I don't like dystopian in general. I don't get the hype, and I found them very repetitive. I think what caught my attention in this one is that you don't follow the dystopian regime in a sense. You follow the aftermath of a dictatorship, or what you may have in a typical dystopian novel. So imagine, you know, Hunger Games, you follow what happened after, if the regime had been overpowered, and now, you know, a sort of democracy is getting back into place, and what happens to the people that were on the wrong side of that. So I found that idea very fascinating. I have to say that all the technology that is in these, I think it's also like kind of like a warning of how technology and how nowadays everything we do is basically online, so it's very easy to, you know, for other people potentially to know what we do, where we are at all times, like governments and so on. So it's definitely, there's a hint of that in these, and I liked the social topic that this explored. I think it went into very deep, for a short novel, social aspects of, you know, dictatorships, and the lack of privacy, and imprisonments, and just all that came with it, and brutality that comes with dictatorships and so on. So I think it tackled a lot of issues in such a short novel. I really like their writing. I have to say that by the time I understood all the technology in this, the book was ending, so that went over my head a bit. I gave this solid 4 stars, and if you like dystopian, or if you're like me, meh, we will try, this might be worth your time. This one time, I think I'm gonna get hate. Not because I disliked a popular book, but because I liked a popular disliked book. Does it make sense? Second place, and I was honestly debating to putting this into first place, and I didn't, because it's less a genre that I usually reach for. The genre that I just like usually tiny bit less than the book that's going to be in the first place. But to be fair, I probably enjoyed them for very different reasons equally. At the second place, I have got Flowers in the Attic by V.C. Andrews. It's a very popular book, especially back in the 80s. It's a book that, you know, if you read as a teen back then when it came out, you know, it was such a divisive book, such like a scandalous book to read. And I had no idea what this book was about. I always heard of it. I never knew what this was about. So to give you a quick synopsis, basically this is about this family. You got older brother, old sister, and then 2 twins, and then, you know, they have a lovely family, lovely parents, and then the dad passes away, and the mom says, well, I can't do anything, like I'm a rich girl, like I'm from a rich family, I was kicked out of the house for a series of reasons, you're gonna find out, but I can't do anything, I can't go to work and sustain, you know, my 4 kids, so I'm gonna go back to my parents' house, and I'm just gonna ask them to forgive me, and hopefully, you know, I can inherit some money, and then we can make it on our own. But because when she had left in disgrace, when she goes back, she has to hide her children in basically the upper part of the house of this huge mansion that her parents have. And so she says to the children, you know, stay here in this attic and this other room underneath the attic, stay here until I can be forgiven by my father, and, you know, everything will be good. Just gonna be a couple of days and then we are all good. And the kids end up staying there for years. Hidden, kidnapped, if you want, in a sense. First of all, what did I just read? Like, wow, that was wild. I honestly don't understand how people could have not suggested these in the most disturbing reads. This is extremely disturbing, and on multiple levels for multiple reasons. However, maybe the audiobook played a part in that. It was such an amazing audiobook, so well narrated. The voices, the pace that she kept, like, I just loved the audiobook. I couldn't stop listening, and audiobook usually are not something that I love. I use a lot because I'm just too busy otherwise to read sometimes, so I do like to, you know, consume books that way. But I just couldn't stop listening, and I just wanted to go on buses or just do house chores so I could keep listening. It is definitely a guilty pleasure read, meaning that the characters are awful. Some of the things don't make much sense, like it doesn't make sense that the kids stay where they are when they could potentially not, for how long they do. So I do definitely recognize that there are issues and that some of the things in here are absurd, but the amount of emotions that this stirred in me, the amount of frustration, rage, pain, and the amount of, you know, how much I was rooting for some of them, and how much I understood also the conflicts of, you know, our main protagonist. I thought she was so well done because she was young. She was 13, 12 when she first got into the attic, and by the time she comes out, she's a bit more mature. And I thought that her lashing out, her behavior, it's, you know, corresponds to a very mature girl, that she has to mature because of everything she's been through, but at the same time she still retains some of the patterns that, you know, of coming out of childhood, some of the tantrums, some of the issue you might have. I found her very believable. And again, I do work with teens day in and day out, and I found her very realistic. And I think a lot of people have critiques about her, and I just honestly, I found her like reflected in so many kids that I actually seen in real life, and I'm just like, they've been through horrible stuff, and it's just like, you're so realistic. She was such a good main character, flawed. And I loved her. I just wished though that she had lashed out more to the awful people in her life. The amount of rage they have for the mother and the grandmother in all of this. Like, I could murder them. And also like the twist toward the end, I really liked it. Like, honestly, I loved this book. I loved it not because it's a lovely book. I loved for what he did, when he did it back in the 80s. It was so shocking. Like, it was so daring as a book, and I did enjoy it. I think it's definitely a book that sticks with you, and I understand why you might not like it. I understand it. I'm not saying that it's, you know, a nice story. It's an awful, disturbing story. I just really liked how disturbing, how emotional this was, and I like the characters, and I will definitely continue on, although I heard horrible things about the sequels. So also, for people just like, oh, these things don't happen, read A Child Called It. Read other true crime out there. Like, these things happen, not exactly like this of course, but similar things, child abuse like this has happened before, so it's not even that unrealistic, unfortunately. And a number one, a book that I put on number one because I think it's definitely sits very well in, you know, one of my favorite genre of books in general. I'm repeating my words a lot today, so apologies, I am very tired. And number one, I've got God Blind. You're all sitting on this one, let me just tell you. Okay, fair enough, I think this is a grimdark fantasy story, and you basically follow, you know, what if you start the story and everything is semi-okay, and there are, you know, the bad guys with the dark gods, blood gods, just put on the side, and now something happens there and they start conquering territory. How about you? It's just like a bit like the premise of, you know, the Ring of Powers of, you know, the Amazon series, the prequel to Lord of the Rings. It's that kind of thing where a threat has been defeated and now all of a sudden becomes very real again. And so you kind of see, you know, the Dark Lords, and you kind of see the bad guys now winning in a sense. So is that kind of grim dark fantasy, and I think this is perfect for people that might be new to the genre, and it's also very good for people like me who do not love traveling fantasy. And this book just goes straight to the point. Like, you don't spend time traveling, you don't spend much time talking or discussing or reading pages about something that's not inherently functional to the, you know, continuation of the plot. So it just jumps from one scene to the other, just goes straight to the point. And probably that is also something that I recognize it can be a bit of a critique, in the sense that the world building is not the best. You're not given sometimes enough context of that. Fair enough. I really like the characters though. I think you follow characters from both sides, and a few of these characters I really enjoyed reading about. Some of these characters are really fun, entertaining. I found that some of the scenes in these were like, whoa, okay. And also like the constant high tension that this has, and, you know, the plot twists are definitely there. Now, this is by no means the best fantasy I've ever read. It's not a favorite of the year or anything, but it's definitely a fantasy that stuck with me for days after I read it and made me want to finish the trilogy. Made me just say, okay, this is a debut novel, I believe. So if this is a debut novel, I am just wondering what she can do next. I would really still recommend this. I think this is overly underrated. I've read so many fantasy, they would just pale in comparison to these, and they're so popular, and this isn't. So God Blind, I really enjoyed it. It's not Malazan, it's not Game of Thrones or anything of the sort, by no means. It's very simple in itself, it's very straight to the point, but it's a very entertaining ride to be on. And that's it for books, guys. Let me know what you read in the comments, and what was your favorite read of the month. So yeah, let's chat in the comments. If you're new, I would love for you to subscribe, so hit the button down below, and I'll see you next time. Take care, ciao!